What's going on, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another pregame show, part of Boot Crew Media. Chris Rosvoglou here with John Hendrix. The Saints going across the pond to London to play the Minnesota Vikings. John, you're in London. What's the experience been like so far?
Yeah, look, it's been tremendous. I've kind of close to falling in love with this place. It's just been so nice. People are nice here. Saints fans have traveled pretty well, both from home and in the UK. So, look, food's been outstanding. Checked out the British Museum. Went by Buckingham Palace today. Did the touristy stuff. I mean, this is a real likable place, and it's definitely different culture out here. But look, there's no place like home. But this has been a good home away from home, for the just about a week now.
Yeah, and it's also been a good home away from home for the Saints, historically speaking, in London. They've had success. It's going to be, kind of interesting this time with what's going on with the Saints. And one of the big storylines, of course, is what's the deal at quarterback. Jameis Winston finally downgraded out. It was originally doubtful, but with the way that he didn't practice this week, everyone kind of knew that it was going to be Andy Dalton's time. Now that just becomes official. What have you seen from Dalton so far? Whether it's training camp, preseason practice. I know we've talked about it before about him kind of, keeping the offense on schedule and taking what the defense gives you. But it's a whole different situation when we're talking about a pregame for a preseason and then all of a sudden talk about a regular season game where the Saints desperately need to get back in the win column. So what's kind of the vibe been with Andy Dalton operating the offense?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is a guy that this is the exact reason you bring him in, right? He's no stranger to running with the first team. He was doing it all week, first team reps. This is the first time we've seen Taysom Hill throw football all of camp, pretty much. Like we didn't see it in camp, saw it this week, and we knew something was up. I think when that happened, and look, Jameis was around, right? He was around the building. We talked to him on Wednesday. Certainly, it's part of the rehab process. Dennis Allen even said that there was some setbacks from the ankle injury he suffered in training camp. So, look, he needs to get healthy. But look, Andy Dalton has been the quarterback and has been around here since even early in spring when we were at OTAs and stuff because Jameis wasn't out on the field then, right? So he's had time to develop some chemistry with these wide receivers. I think he'll be just fine. He didn't have Michael Thomas back then, really, obviously. So, look, he's been working with Olave, Landry, all those guys. So, look, the confidence is there from him. Cam Jordan and Mark Ingram gave him some big shout outs talking about the 2011 draft class and Red Rifle. So everybody's behind Andy in this one. And look, he's a guy that I just don't think you need this team to make him throw for 300-400 yards a game and get 5 touchdown passes. Just be efficient, get the drives going, start early, build off of that success, put together some touchdown drives because this Saints offense has been really struggling in that aspect.
Yeah, and you talk about the offense and the way it's been struggling when you bring in an Andy Dalton who is, from a style standpoint, much different from Jameis Winston. I know when we look at Jameis, it's the arm talent stuff. Andy's probably a little bit more methodical, short intermediates, probably what we're going to see out of this. Is this a situation where we have to take whatever we've seen the last 3 weeks and kind of throw that out for now and expect a whole different offense? Like I look at the preseason games and I see, dumping it off to Dwayne Washington or a couple throws to Adam Troutman. And those are two guys we really haven't heard much of, especially the latter and Troutman. Do you expect other players to kind of have an increased role now that it is a change at quarterback for now? Or should we see kind of what we've been seeing? A lot of Olave, Jarvis Landry, if he's healthy. What do you expect from that department in terms of how they're spreading the wealth?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So first thing I would say is, yeah, I expect Olave's target share to kind of dip a little bit. I don't think they'll be as aggressive in the deep range, but look, Olave is a guy that can run all the route trees, right? So I think if anything, get him a little bit more creative in how he catches the football. He doesn't have to be a deep threat here. Obviously, Traquan Smith is a guy that looked really good last week against Carolina, one of the lone bright spots in such a bad time. But I think he's a guy that Andy trusts. Same thing with Jarvis Landry. So I think he's got between those three and then obviously Quez, he's got 4 guys that he can really trust. And that's something he's talked about this week is leaning on those guys that have been here like since last year. I expect Deontay Hardy back in this lineup. That would be also a help to the offense and even just the return game. But, it's interesting you brought up some of the things because we might get into it in a minute, but Latavius Murray got elevated this week, right? And so, and JP Holtz is actually going to be in at fullback instead of Adam Prentice. And Holtz and Dalton were teammates in Chicago. So I thought that was kind of interesting just thinking about it. Like, this is a guy that's familiar with Dalton, probably can give him some better protection maybe or do some different things. But the Murray one's pretty eye raising to me. And the thing is, I'll tell you, is that when we watched Friday, Alvin Kamara's reps were pretty limited. They gave a lot to Murray. They gave a lot to the other running backs. So I don't know if it's a sign of things to necessarily come, but, like that Alvin won't play or anything. But I think that maybe his workload is going to be cut back a little bit. And look, Mark Ingram's had some fumble problems. Latavius Murray is a veteran guy that they trust. So I'm really interested to see how that split's going to work on Sunday.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. That's actually, the next thing I was going to talk about, Latavius Murray getting called up, to the main roster. And to your point, it could be either one of those things, right? Maybe it's a Kamara thing. Maybe it's getting another running back in there with the backfield kind of struggling the way it is. With Kamara, though, let's say he does play, and obviously this is a big if right now, and we probably won't know until kickoff comes around. Do you think we might see a little bit more usage in the passing game? And maybe not just Kamara, just running backs in general. That's been something that's, I'd say, been lacking ever since the post-Drew Brees playing days.
Yeah, I would think so. I think this is the thing that I don't want to say is frustrated fans, but something that you look at the tape and see that Winston has taken options where he could have probably had shorter options, right? Take the checkdowns, take Kamara, take this player. Troutman was a guy that was running across the formation. You had him, but he forced the ball to Jarvis Landry. I think this is a guy with Andy Dalton. And again, this is no disrespect to Jameis Winston, but a guy who's going to take what's available. And, look, the Vikings are going to have their work cut out for them. And obviously not having Michael Thomas is a big deal. But, look, I think these running backs can get a little bit more success. The screen game really hasn't worked well for the Saints so far. I think that's an area where they could potentially get a little bit better. And look, Latavius Murray is a veteran in this league. And I'm a big Murray fan. I liked everything they did when he was with the Saints. And, the only reason he wasn't there is because Tony Jones Jr. had looked so good in preseason, the year that he got cut and such. But, I think their usage will be a little bit better. I'm waiting to see that screen game get a little bit better. You're not going to have Andres Pete there. That's a big blow to the screen game. You got Calvin Throckmorton there. So those are certainly nuances to pay attention to. But, look, I think that you could see a little bit more of the running back usage. I just don't know what level. Like, I don't know about the confidence in the screen game. I do feel like maybe some checkdowns or just something out of the backfield, angle routes, whatever the case may be, option routes. I think that would be Dalton's best friend on Sunday.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Michael Thomas being out. We flip it to Jarvis Landry, questionable. You got to see him in practice. Do you feel pretty good about where that's trending? I know you talked about Kamara being limited. What about Landry?
Yeah, look, Landry looked pretty good in practice on Friday. And the thing is, against Panthers in Charlotte, look, he was trying to get back into the game. And, I mean, at one point it looked really bad. He was in the medical tent, went back, got x-rays and such, came back out, was upgraded to probable, and just couldn't work out whatever he was dealing with. And so, if it was a bigger game, could he have really went back in and toughed it out? Probably so. But the way things were going, obviously that was a smarter play, not playing him. So I think his outlook looks really good for tomorrow. I'm anticipating that he's going to play. And look, he's going to have his work cut out for him too. I mean, this is no joke of a Vikings secondary, Vikings defense. They're going to need guys that can move the chains. Landry's going to be the guy that's leading this charge tomorrow without a Michael Thomas.
Yeah, and something that's kind of, I don't want to say gone under the radar, but I would say doesn't get talked about enough right now because so much of the focus has been on offense. Marcus May missing now 2 games in a row. May's out. I'll flip it more so to the positive side of things on the injury report. No injury designation for Paulson Adebo. He did play last week, but very limited, right? That like kind of easing him into the defense. Do you feel like this might be the week where Adebo gets that increased workload and we get to kind of see what everyone was talking about in training camp about him kind of being the MVP of that department?
Yeah, look, I think so. I feel like that's where things are trending now. I was watching him in practice. There was a day he came out, he had his left ankle taped up. So something to keep an eye out for, just to see if it does affect or anything like that. But, the next day he wasn't having tape on his ankle or anything. So, look, I think it's a good sign. The way they used him last week is they brought him in on third down situations, moved him to the outside, put Roby in the slot. So, maybe you see more of a 50-50 split instead of saying maybe he goes 100%. But look, I'm interested to see how they match up against Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and of course they're going to have to get that pass rush going with Kirk Cousins. And look, PJ Williams presumably would start at safety. I'm interested to see if they do that again, or maybe they even see about Justin Evans. I just know that there was some strugglesome moments. That 67-yard touchdown, PJ Williams whiffed bad on that tackle. You can't have that, right? And so Justin Evans is a guy they can move around a good bit. Maybe you keep Roby in the slot if Adebo is actually going to play a lot more here. But real interesting wrinkle. But I can just tell you that Adebo looked pretty good in practice this week. So I don't know if I'd say he's going to be 100% of the snaps, but I'm anticipating he's going to have a much larger workload, at least a 50-50 split.
Yeah, and that would be great news concerning the opponent and what they're going up against at the wide receiver spot. Justin Jefferson, obviously a fan favorite in Louisiana, and then Adam Thielen, who historically has kind of had his way with the Saints. And we bring up, matchups every week and what's important. I think it's one of those games where you can just get, cut straight to the chase and talk about what people want to see. And that's Jefferson versus Lattimore, which should hopefully be on display multiple times. And, in a year where a lot of talk is about the offense and whatnot, we also want to shed light on what is working for this team, and what has been working is Marshawn Lattimore matched up against any wide receiver, what he's kind of done so far. Do you feel like this could be one of those games where we get to see whether it's him shadowing a receiver or maybe not shadowing because the Vikings have two great ones in their own right? Is that kind of the matchup that you're circling for this game?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is a premier matchup. Justin Jefferson has been, is a guy that set the world on fire. And listen, this is the time where Marshawn Lattimore comes to the table and plays really well, right? And so, look, it's going to be interesting because we can go back to Adebo. One of the things that I'm most interested to see when he does get 100% is the physicality aspect, because some of those plays that he made in camp, those could go either way, and he could get flagged for him. But with Lattimore, look, he's so good at what he does. Jefferson's a guy I don't think you can maybe 100% shut down, but I think Lattimore's up for the challenge. And look, I think it's going to depend on the timing Kirk Cousins has. Does he follow him all game? Does he just work on one side? Those are all the wrinkles that you're looking at. I'm just really excited to see that matchup, among other things. How this pass rush is going to respond. We expected it to get better against the Panthers last week. One thing I'd say keep an eye on is Cam Jordan. Without saying too much, I don't know if he's coming into this game 100%, but it's going to be something to see how much of a rotation that he's going to get in this one too. But they're going to need this pass rush to do extremely big things to disrupt Kirk Cousins. He's a guy that they're familiar playing against. But Justin Jefferson versus Marshawn Lattimore is the top matchup of the day, I would say, for anybody that's looking.
Yeah, and another sneaky thing, this season, the run defense has kind of been a little bit of a up and down. Week 1 struggle against that Mariota Patterson offense. Week 2 dominant showing against Leonard Fournette in the Bucs, and then week 3, whether it's fatigue or whatnot, McCaffrey did have over 100 rushing yards. That's something that the Saints want to avoid, and they've been so good at avoiding over the years. Dalvin Cook banged up. Run defense has been a little inconsistent so far. What's kind of the mood in the locker room from the defensive line? I know people talk about the sacks and the lack thereof coming into week 3. They kind of straightened that out in week 3, I would say, though. Run defense wise, though, what's the confidence level of that unit? Because for the last couple of years, it's kind of been a staple of this Saints team.
Yeah, confidence is there. And the thing is, Cam Jordan said it after the game, after the loss, is, and I asked him about it, it's just that can't happen, right? I mean, they've got to get better with lane integrity. They got to get better with tackling. They just cannot let these guys run wild over them. And, I think this is a lot of guilty hands in this. It's not just on one particular player or one particular assignment or anything like that. And so, look, they've got to get it back, right? And, they've been humbled pretty early in these 2 of these 3 games. And look, this is part of the, even what I've said in here, and we've talked about this, it's kind of this newness still of a lot of people getting used to each other, and just how this front defensive line plays with versus, having Pete Warner back there instead of Quan Alexander, or just a newer secondary, and just all these parts and pieces that are a little bit not as familiar with each other. But look, it's been all business. And the thing is, I think that fans can appreciate most here is this team is all in. They're not, nobody's feeling sorry for themselves. They know what they have to do. They know they got to stop from shooting themselves in the foot. They can't turn the ball over. They just have to go out and execute. And the thing is, this team is too talented not to execute. So whether you chalk it up to coaching or bad decisions or bad tackling, whatever the case, we've seen it all for these first 3 games. And look, London is kind of one of these games where they use as a like bounce back spot or can get their season right, and a lot is going to have to go right to do that. But look, I think some of this bodes well in their favor. Vikings didn't travel in until Friday. I can tell you firsthand, this time change, it's a 6-hour difference coming from Minnesota and coming up from New Orleans. That makes a big difference. And it took me about 2 days to get used to it. And the Saints, they've done all these sleep studies and stuff. I expect that to play a little bit of factor. Maybe the Vikings can get a little bit, off to a slower start because of it. But, that Saints defense is going to have to isolate Dalvin Cook. I don't think he's somebody you can completely shut down. But, look, they've played him plenty of times. They know what to expect here. But, look, it's all going to be about this execution. That's how they're going to win this football game.
Yeah, and last thing before we wrap up, John, you talk about that time difference thing. Mood-wise, are you cautiously optimistic going into this one? I know 1-2, a little back against the wall. We talked about the London effect. Saints kind of go away from the noise, which I think is the right strategy, when you go to, back-to-back games the way it played out. How are you feeling about this one going in?
Man, I think the thing is I'm cautiously optimistic. And here's the thing. I think this is a catch-22 because let's just say the Saints do win and Andy Dalton looks really good. What do you think's coming next? A quarterback controversy, right? That's just what everybody's going to talk about. Now, look, this is Jameis's team. Still is Jameis's team. So even if Andy does light it up, I still think he's going to be the guy that they move forward with. But look, they're trying to make sure he gets healthy and gets rehab right. And the thing is, Jameis wants to play. But, Andy Dalton stepping in, he can put together a win. That's going to help turn around the season. I think the Saints can win this game. You got Seattle at home. You don't have a bye week after this. I think that's also a winnable game. So you can right this ship really quickly. Minnesota's no easy task for sure. I think they looked a little bit sloppy against the Lions. They looked really suspect against the Eagles. This is definitely a beatable team, and some teams are just not as good as their record seems like. I think the Saints can come out with a win here. They're going to have a lot of things go right. But just honestly, if they can just execute in the first couple of quarters, I think they can win this game. That's really all they need to do because I think defensively they can respond and do everything they need to. Offensively, just put a couple of drives together, put some points up on the board, preferably touchdowns. But I feel actually really good about this game.
Yeah, slow starts and the Saints have been a dynamic duo through the first 3 weeks. We'll see if that comes to an end week 4. Saints in London, John Hendrix checking it out across the pond. He'll have up-to-date stuff throughout the game. You guys know how John rolls, and we'll see what happens there. Saints
bright and early
Sunday in London. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see what happens. Thank you guys so much for tuning in as always, and we'll be back next week with another pregame show.
Thanks.